I never expected the last words I'd hear from Camilla to be, "Get out and never come back." Not after everything I'd done. Not after I emptied 2 savings accounts and sacrificed a down payment on a home we both claimed we wanted. I'd just given $20,000 to save her parents' house, her family's house, because that's what you do when you're married. You help. You don't calculate the return. You don't demand receipts. You show up, even when no one else will. And yet, there I was, standing in the doorway of what used to be our shared home, staring at cardboard boxes. My boxes. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd read the scene wrong. Maybe there was an explanation, a misunderstanding. But no. Camilla was leaning against the doorframe like a warden, arms crossed, lip curled. Her voice didn't shake. Her eyes didn't water. She looked at me like I was a tenant 2 months late on rent. "You think that money makes you necessary?" she said, her tone laced with something colder than hate, contempt. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because how do you respond to that? How do you defend yourself when all you've ever done is give? When every paycheck went toward making sure her world didn't collapse? When every weekend was spent fixing what her father broke and pretending I was happy just to keep peace? I wasn't trying to be her savior. I just didn't want her to drown. "You wouldn't survive a month without me," she added, arms still crossed, like she was daring me to collapse right there on the porch. I didn't collapse. I didn't yell. I didn't even argue. I looked around the room one last time. The couch I built. The shelf I installed. The wedding photo still hanging slightly crooked above the TV from the time I tried to straighten it, and she said, "It's fine. Just leave it." I left. I didn't take a suitcase. I didn't grab my toothbrush. I didn't slam the door. I just stepped outside with nothing but the clothes I wore to work and the last words she'd ever say to me ringing in my ears. "Get out and never come back." The thing is, there's a silence that comes with shock. Not the silence of peace or relief, but of numbness. Like someone unplugged your soul and left you standing in the dark with nothing but your own heartbeat to keep you company. I walked. I don't even remember where. I just moved forward because going back wasn't an option. Not after that. Not after the look she gave me. Like I was a roach that had outstayed its welcome. I slept on a coworker's couch that night. Tarek. He didn't ask questions. Just handed me a blanket and a beer and said, "Whatever it is, it's temporary." I nodded, but in my gut, I knew it wasn't. You don't pack a man's life into boxes unless you're done. You don't throw someone out after they save your parents' home unless you never wanted them there to begin with. For days, I didn't tell anyone what happened. I still wore my ring. Still checked her Instagram like a fool. But then came the call that broke whatever was left of my delusion. It was her mother, Darlene. Her voice was sharp, frantic. "Corey, why is the bank saying the mortgage hasn't been paid? Didn't you say you covered it?" I was sitting on a park bench when I answered, watching pigeons fight over crumbs. I could have lied. Could have said I'd look into it. But something inside me clicked, something that had stayed too quiet for too long. "Ask Camilla," I said, my voice calm, maybe even amused. "She wanted me gone." A pause. Then, "You're joking." I wasn't. And for the first time since Camilla shoved me out of her life like I was dead weight, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. They had used me. Smiled at me. Praised me when I was useful. But the second the bills were paid and the storm had passed, they made it clear I was never part of the foundation. I was the umbrella in the downpour, nice to have until the sky cleared. But I wasn't broken. I wasn't lost. And despite what Camilla thought, I could survive without her. In fact, I already was. 6 years. That's how long I wore the title of husband like a badge, even when it started to feel more like a name tag I wasn't allowed to take off. "Corey, can you fix the sink?" "Corey, your job has benefits, right?" "Corey, mom and dad need help again." I told myself it was love. That marriage meant sacrifice, and I was simply doing my part. But there's a difference between being a partner and being a lifeline. I didn't see the shift when it happened. I only felt the slow erosion of myself. Camilla was elegance and ambition. She moved through rooms like she owned them. She had this laugh sharp, knowing, that made people lean in. And when we first met, she used to look at me like I was the only thing in the world she wanted. I was a logistics analyst at the time. Nothing glamorous. But I had drive, a steady paycheck, and I never flinched when things got tough. That used to be enough for her. Her family had that upper-crust polish, grand piano no one played, white wine at 2 p.m., heirloom vases they never dusted. But underneath the marble countertops and curated smiles was a slow financial rot. Wesley, her father, had once owned a chain of dealerships, respectable, even enviable. But the pandemic wiped him out. Loans defaulted. Locations closed. Darlene, her mother, hadn't worked in over a decade, yet dressed every day like she was heading to a judging panel for Miss America. Her version of resilience was denial and pearls. They never outright said it, but I could feel it. I was the outsider who made their dysfunction livable. I wasn't good enough to brag about, but I was good enough to fix the heater when it broke or pay the plumber when the pipes burst. Every time Camilla said, "We really appreciate what you do," I'd hear the unspoken second part, because no one else is offering. At first, I thought we were building something. I took on extra shifts, stayed late at work, chased every promotion. Each raise went into the household. Leaky roof? I paid for it. Darlene's dental emergency? Covered. Wesley's bounce check at the country club? I cleared it without a word. I told myself, this is what love looks like. Unconditional, quiet, consistent. But somewhere along the way, I became invisible. Not just to her family. To her. Camilla started staying out later. Girls' night, she'd say, brushing past me in heels I hadn't seen before. She stopped asking about my day, stopped looking up from her phone when I walked in. Her laughter, once soft and private, turned sharp, performative, saved for everyone but me. And when we did talk, it was mostly about bills, deadlines, her family's needs. I remember one night, coming home from a brutal 12-hour shift. I was exhausted, clothes still damp from a rainstorm I hadn't prepared for. I walked in, hoping for even a half smile. She didn't even glance up from her tablet. "Wesley needs $1,200 by Friday," she said. "Can you move things around?" No, how was your day? No, did you eat? Just need. Always need. And I provided. Because that's what I was to them. A provider, not a partner. Not a man with dreams or limits. Just a walking, talking contingency plan. The moment I realized I'd become a ghost in my own marriage wasn't loud. It wasn't even cruel. It was a Tuesday. Camilla had a charity luncheon, some event for a boutique cause she barely remembered, and I had the day off. I made breakfast. Real breakfast. Eggs, pancakes, her favorite vanilla almond coffee. I set the table, played our old playlist on low in the background. I wanted to recreate a piece of us, remind her that we were more than invoices and obligations. She walked in, looked at the spread, then at her phone. "I don't have time to eat," she said, grabbing a banana from the counter. "And don't forget, we have that dinner with my parents next week. We're something decent this time." And just like that, she was gone. No thank you. No kiss. No glance back. I sat at that table alone. The food got cold. The music played on. And I realized I was a ghost. Still moving, still showing up, but unseen. Unfelt. It wasn't that she stopped loving me. It was that somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a function. I was the Wi-Fi, only noticed when it went down. So, I did what ghosts do. I drifted. I stopped volunteering stories about my day. Stopped waiting up for her to come home. Stopped checking the bank account with hope. I paid what needed paying. I smiled at her mother. I fixed the things that broke. But inside, I was already fading. Camilla once said, "You're the most reliable man I know." It was meant as a compliment. It felt like a eulogy. It started with a phone call, one of those hushed, dramatic ones that always came when Darlene didn't want Wesley to overhear. Her voice was tight, like she was trying to sound calm but couldn't quite pull it off. "We're at risk of foreclosure," she said. "Wes won't say it, but we're about to lose everything." I was sitting in the break room at work, half listening to the coffee machine hiss behind me while I stared at the email I hadn't had the energy to open yet. The kind of exhaustion that lives behind your eyes that no amount of caffeine can fix. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, already reaching for my wallet like instinct. "How much?" I asked, even though I knew the number wouldn't be small. She hesitated. "They need just under 20. The bank said if we make that final lump payment, we'll be caught up." "I swear, Corey, we didn't want to come to you. But it's fine," I interrupted. "I'll take care of it." And just like that, I was $20,000 lighter. I transferred 12 from my savings, the one I'd been quietly building for a home Camilla and I could one day call ours, maybe with a backyard, maybe a tiny porch with creaky steps. Then I pulled the rest from my emergency fund. It hurt. God, it hurt. But I told myself this was temporary, that this was what family did, that someday they'd look back and say, "Corey saved us." Camilla cried that night, wrapped her arms around me like she hadn't in months. Thank you, she whispered into my chest. You didn't have to. I know, I said, rubbing slow circles into her back. But I wanted to. It felt like we were healing, like something had shifted. We watched a movie that night, ordered takeout, laughed over how bad the acting was. She curled up against me and stayed until the credits rolled. It had been so long since she'd chosen closeness. I told myself we were okay now, but it only took 7 days to prove me wrong. The change was gradual, first in her tone, then in her eyes. She stopped looking at me like a person again. Her patience wore thin. Conversations were shorter. Her body language closed off. And then came the accusations. You act like you're the savior of this family, she spat one night when I asked why she'd been so cold lately. I didn't say that, I replied carefully. You don't have to. You walk around like you're some kind of martyr. Like every dollar you spend buys you more value. I was stunned. I was trying to helpish. No, you were trying to feel important, she snapped. I didn't recognize her. This wasn't the woman who once begged me to take a weekend off so we could lay under the stars and name our future children. This was someone else, someone sharper, more jaded, and incredibly angry. And I couldn't figure out why. Then came Friday. I came home from work, bone-tired, hungry, and still replaying that morning's team meeting in my head, only to find the living room changed. Boxes stacked neatly near the door. But not hers. Mine. My coat. My shoes. My laptop bag. Even the few books I liked to keep by the couch. Packed and sealed like they were being evicted from their own life. Camilla was waiting, standing in the foyer in leggings and a silk blouse, arms folded across her chest like a final verdict. What is this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. This is me being honest, she said flatly. This isn't working, Corey. I just paid your parents' mortgage. Don't, she cut in sharply. Don't throw that in my face like it gives you a right to stay. I took a step forward, the familiar walls suddenly closing in like strangers. Camilla, I've been carrying us for years. She laughed, a bitter, humorless thing. You? Carrying us? You're just a man with a wallet and a job that barely scratches 6 figures. I've been carrying this marriage. My heart didn't break. It calcified. She said my name like it was a stain. Like I was a mold in her perfect life she couldn't scrub out fast enough. You don't belong in this house, she finished, opening the front door. And you know it. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't even try to reason with her. I realized, in that moment, that she didn't want a husband. She wanted a sponsor, a donor, a disposable security blanket. So I walked out. No suitcase, no keys, no goodbye. Just one phrase ringing in my head as the door closed behind me. You don't belong in this house. Maybe not, but I'd built it. And now, I was walking away from it, piece by piece, until I had nothing left of the life I thought was ours. Except one thing, the memory of handing over $20,000 in love and getting a goodbye in return. The apartment smelled like chipped paint and loneliness when I first stepped inside. A single bulb flickered in the ceiling, the kind of dim yellow that made shadows look like bruises on the wall. The floor creaked in protest with every step, and the heat took a solid 20 minutes to kick in. But it was mine. Or at least it would be, once I signed the lease and handed over the deposit with a hollow smile. A one-bedroom on the edge of downtown, sandwiched between a laundromat and a liquor store. Not exactly the dream, but it was quiet. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't have to shrink myself to make room for someone else's chaos. I bought a kettle. One of those cheap ones from a discount store with a plastic handle that got warm if you let it boil too long. I didn't even drink tea like that before, but something about the act of pouring hot water into a mug, waiting, sipping slowly, it felt deliberate. Like I was learning how to take my time again. I started making my own meals, not because I was a great cook, but because standing over a stove, stirring something simple, reminded me I could still provide for me. The silence wasn't deafening. It was honest. No more midnight arguments about bills. No more guilt-tripping glances when I didn't have the energy to play savior. Just me, a worn couch I found on Craigslist, and the sound of the city humming faintly beyond the window. Work was different. People noticed. Not right away, but slowly, like they were seeing me through a new lens. I laughed more. Not forced, not polite, real laughs. I made eye contact. Hell, I even started bringing lunch instead of skipping meals to cover overtime. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't dread looking at my bank account. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't bailing out a sinking ship every week either. My money stayed where I put it. My time stretched further. Ainsley from HR stopped me in the break room one afternoon. She was new, maybe 3 weeks in. Sharp eyes, soft smile. "You look different," she said, handing me the sugar. "Like someone let go of you." I almost dropped my coffee. I didn't ask what she meant, because I already knew. "I've been sleeping better," I replied with a shrug. "Must be nice," she laughed. "Most people walk into this place looking like ghosts." I smiled polite. But inside, I thought, I used to be one. That's the thing no one tells you about being in a relationship where you're constantly giving. You start fading. Not all at once. Not even obviously. But in slow, invisible ways. You forget what your favorite movie is. You forget the last time you bought something just for yourself. You forget what your voice sounds like when it isn't filtered through someone else's expectations. And then, one day, you look in the mirror and realize the person staring back doesn't even look surprised to be unhappy. But now there was stillness. Not emptiness, stillness. I filled my shelves with books I loved. Not ones we agreed on, not ones that matched the decor. Just books that made me feel something. I picked up an old hobby, sketching, badly, but with the kind of messy joy I hadn't felt since college. I made playlists for myself, not for parties or road trips or background noise during cleaning sprees. Just music that echoed the rhythm of my new, slower life. I stopped checking Camilla's social media, not out of bitterness, out of clarity. What was the point of watching someone perform a life that had never really included me? What was the point of reopening wounds just to feel something? I deleted our anniversary photos from my phone, not out of spite, but because I needed the space. Physically, mentally, spiritually. Those memories had stopped being mine the moment she decided I was replaceable. I'd spent so long managing someone else's narrative that I forgot I had the right to write my own. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even heartbroken anymore. I was breathing, really breathing. The kind of inhale that doesn't come with guilt or anticipation of the next crisis. The kind that simply exists because you're alive and you've made it through another day without sinking. I didn't need applause. I didn't need validation. I needed space. And that's exactly what I gave myself. One evening, as the city lights blinked on in the distance and traffic whispered below my window, I sat on my creaky couch with a mug of peppermint tea and no plans. Just stillness. And I realized I wasn't waiting for someone to knock on the door. I wasn't hoping for a message or a call or some grand apology. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was beginning. And that mattered more than any sorry ever could. It was a Sunday morning when the past tried to crawl back into my life. The kettle was just starting to hiss on the stove. I'd gotten into the habit of starting my day slow, no alarms, no rush. Just silence, a cup of peppermint tea, and the occasional sound of rain against the window. I liked it that way. It was a rhythm I built for myself after years of marching to someone else's beat. The apartment might have been old, the furniture mismatched, but every inch of it was mine. No judgment, no pretense, no Camilla. And then my phone rang. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in weeks, Darlene, Camilla's mom. I stared at it, not because I was tempted to answer, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I owed her even a hello. Eventually, curiosity won. I slid my thumb across the screen and brought the phone to my ear. "Corey." Her voice crackled through like a broken radio. Tight. Urgent. Not like the woman who used to order me to smile more and family photos. "I'm here," I said, flatly. I didn't know who else to call. I stayed quiet. She continued. "The mortgage. Why wasn't it paid this month? We got a warning notice from the bank yesterday. They said if the next installment isn't received by Friday, they'll move forward with collection proceedings." I leaned back in my chair and stared out the window. A man across the street was walking his dog. He looked peaceful, in control, like the world still made sense. "I thought it was all covered," Darlene added. "You said it was settled." I didn't answer right away. I wanted her to sit with that silence. Let it press in around her like it had pressed in on me the night I was told to leave the home I helped preserve. "Ask Camilla," I finally said, keeping my tone even. She was pretty clear I wasn't needed anymore. The pause on the other end of the line was everything I expected and more. I could practically hear her blinking in disbelief. She wasn't used to being spoken to this way, especially not by me. Not by the man she once introduced to her friends as my daughter's project. "You're joking," she said. "I'm not. But you paid the $20,000. Right." I interrupted. "I paid it. I wired it directly into the account tied to the mortgage. I even had the confirmation receipt. But what happened to that money afterward? That's a Camilla conversation, not a Corey problem. Corey, don't do this. Please. I already did it, I replied. I did more than any of you ever asked for. I gave up savings, gave up peace, gave up my place in your daughter's life just so she could pretend I was disposable. And now you're calling me because reality hit the mailbox. There was a long exhale, the kind people take when they're finally understanding the damage they helped cause. But I didn't feel triumphant. I wasn't gloating. I just felt done. You always used to be the dependable one, Darlene said quietly. I still am, I told her. Just not for you. Click. I didn't slam the phone. I didn't throw it across the room or scream into the void. I just placed it gently on the counter and poured myself a cup of tea. The steam swirled in the air, catching the morning light. I sipped it, calm and focused, as the kettle cooled beside me. I knew that wasn't the last call I'd get. When people have relied on you like a crutch, they don't just limp away when you leave. They reach back. They stumble. They blame the ground for being uneven instead of accepting they leaned too hard for too long. And now, the cracks were showing. Not because I failed them, but because I finally stopped holding everything together. Later that day, I logged into my old banking dashboard, the one I used to send the mortgage payment. The transaction was still there, $20,000 wired out. No mistake. No refund. No dispute. I took a screenshot and saved it. Not for revenge. Not for court. Just for me. Proof that I'd done more than enough. I opened my email. I still had the message from the mortgage company confirming receipt. I even had the text Camilla sent that night. Thank you. You saved my family. Funny how gratitude could expire so quickly. I closed the laptop, walked back to the window, and watched as that same man across the street tossed a ball for his dog. I envied the simplicity of it. No backstabbing. No questions. Just loyalty, fresh air, and a moment that didn't ask anything more than presence. That's what I wanted now. Not apologies. Not explanations. Just distance. Distance from people who only knew how to love me when I was useful. Darlene's voice still echoed in my head. Didn't you say it was all covered? Yes, I did. Because it was. But what they didn't realize was that with that payment, I didn't just cover a mortgage. I paid my way out of a life that never saw me. And I wasn't going back. Long before I left, before the door slammed and silence took its place, I started keeping a ledger. Not out of suspicion. Not out of bitterness. Out of self-preservation. There's something about constantly giving that makes you want to prove, at least to yourself, that it happened. That the late nights, the double shifts, the skipped meals, the overdrafts, the wire transfers, all of it meant something. Because when no one says thank you, when no one even acknowledges it happened, you start to wonder if you imagined it. So I documented everything. On my old laptop, a beat-up Dell with a cracked corner and battery that gave up after 20 minutes unplugged. I had a folder labeled House. Inside were spreadsheets with dates, notes, and amounts. The title of the first sheet was simple, Support History. I started it 1 month after Camilla and I got married. I told myself it was to stay organized. But deep down, I think I knew somewhere I might need a record. Not for them. For me. July 12th, $1,450, AC replacement. Wesley said the heat was making Darlene sick. August 3rd, $760, Darlene's dental emergency. I still remember her saying, I'll pay you back, and the way she never brought it up again. September 18th, $4,200, roof leak. I didn't sleep for 2 nights thinking about how I'd stretch the paycheck. It went on like that. 6 years of quiet transactions. Some were big. Others were just, can you spot me till Friday deposits. Groceries. Gas money. Emergency car repairs. A loan for Camilla's cousin who wanted to start a podcast and disappeared right after. I kept the screenshots too, bank transfers, Venmo notes, Cash App receipts. Even texts where Camilla would say things like, you're a lifesaver, or couldn't have done it without you. Little digital footprints of a man holding up a collapsing house with both hands while everyone else acted like the floor had always been that steady. I never showed anyone, not even Camilla, because it felt pathetic keeping score in a marriage that was supposed to be a partnership. But what they never understood was I didn't write it all down to throw it back in their faces. I wrote it down so I didn't lose myself completely in their needs. So I could look at that list and say, you were there. You mattered. You didn't imagine it. After I left, I started reading through it again. At night, when the apartment was quiet and the doubts started to creep in, I'd open the file and scroll, and with every line, I felt steadier, like I was reconstructing the man they'd chipped away at. I remembered the Christmas when I gave Wesley $2,000 to catch up on the utility bills so the lights wouldn't go off during their big family dinner. They still bragged about the meal to their friends, never mentioned how it was funded. Or the time Camilla maxed out her credit card trying to keep up appearances and I quietly paid it off without a word, just so she wouldn't drown in interest. I even had notes beside each line, little journal entries in the margins. She said this was the last time. Wesley promised he'd call and thank me. He didn't. Darlene said, "You're such a blessing," like she was reading from a script. Looking back now, the pattern was glaring. I wasn't a husband to them. I was a service, a resource, a patch kit for their leaking lives. And the moment I stopped plugging the holes, they panicked. Because the water started rushing in. Fast. They assumed I didn't keep track. They assumed I was too passive, too loyal, too dumb to protect myself. They were wrong. I had the ledger. I had the emails. I had the numbers. And most of all, I had the clarity they never expected me to reach. One night, I printed the whole thing. 74 pages. Single-spaced. Each one a small testament to everything I gave. I didn't plan to send it. I wasn't looking to humiliate anyone. I just needed to hold it in my hands. Tangible proof that I'd carried more than my weight. I sat on the floor with the stack beside me and let myself cry, not because I wanted them back, not because I missed them, but because I was grieving the version of myself that thought love meant becoming invisible. Camilla used to say, "You're always so calm. Like nothing shakes you." What she never saw was that the calm came from effort, an exhausting effort to be strong for everyone else while I quietly unraveled behind the scenes. Now I was piecing myself back together. And those records? They weren't ammunition. They were therapy. Evidence that I didn't imagine my effort. Proof that I loved as best I could. A map back to myself. So when the phone rang again, this time with Camilla's name on the screen, I didn't rush to answer. I didn't brace myself. I just smiled, set the phone down, and opened the window. The wind felt like freedom, and I had the receipts to prove I'd earned every breath of it. It was around 10:47 p.m. when I opened the laptop again. Not because I couldn't sleep, though that was true, but because something had been gnawing at me for days, like a whisper I couldn't quite hear. Ever since Darlene's frantic phone call, a thread had started to unravel in my mind. Something wasn't adding up. And when numbers don't add up, I pay attention. I typed in the login credentials to the mortgage portal I'd used to send the $20,000. The bank's homepage loaded slowly, as if it, too, was reluctant to show me the truth. I navigated to the transaction history. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. The last successful payment was 2 months before Camilla told me to leave. The payment I had made. Nothing after that. No follow-up installments. No scheduled payments. No partial deposits. And yet, the balance didn't reflect any significant drop after my lump sum transfer. There should have been a smaller outstanding amount. Instead, it looked like the payment had been received, and then nothing. I clicked deeper into the statements. The $20,000 had been deposited, and then withdrawn into a secondary linked account 3 days later. My stomach turned. That account didn't belong to the mortgage company. It belonged to Camilla. Or, at the very least, was connected to the same routing number she'd used when we used to split utilities early in our marriage. She'd taken it. Not to pay the mortgage. Not to save the family home. But for something else. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen like it had just confessed something criminal. And maybe it had. I wasn't sure what I expected. I guess some part of me believed that, no matter how broken our marriage had become, the help I offered at the end had been used honestly. That if nothing else, she wouldn't turn a lifeline into a lie. But now I knew better. I grabbed my phone and pulled up her Instagram, out of pure impulse. I hadn't checked it in weeks, and I almost regretted it the moment it loaded. There she was. Camilla, in a flowy red dress, standing beside a rented yacht in Miami, holding a champagne flute. The caption read, "Reset. Refocus. Rebirth." It was posted the same week I'd wired the money. My mouth went dry. There were more posts. A spa in Scottsdale. A weekend retreat in Sedona with a handful of her girlfriends. Photos of cocktails, massages, smiles, each image dripping in serenity, paid for by sacrifice. Paid for by me. I scrolled further and saw it. A tag story I hadn't caught before. Camilla and her cousin Brandon. Him grinning with a white-toothed smile, flashing car keys, standing beside a custom-wrapped Jeep. Big thanks to my favorite cousin for believing in me. I remembered Brandon. Loud. always chasing some new venture. Vaping in my car once during a family barbecue. His last startup crashed within 3 months. He was charming in a way that fooled people who didn't know better. Camilla knew better, and she gave him my money anyway. My vision blurred for a moment, not from rage, not even from betrayal. From clarity. A painful, sharp-edged clarity that cut through years of excuses, manipulation, and gaslighting. She had never seen my sacrifices as love. She saw them as leverage. Tools. Backup plans. The $20,000 wasn't a lifeline for her. It was an opportunity. A resource she felt entitled to spend however she pleased. And when I stopped being useful, she discarded me like a broken ATM. I didn't punch a wall. I didn't scream. I closed the browser, stood up, and walked over to the sink. I ran the water, splashed some on my face, and stared into the mirror above the counter. You did your part, I said aloud. My voice didn't shake. I repeated it. You did your part. They chose the rest. This was more than theft. It was emotional fraud. Spiritual theft. The kind of betrayal that doesn't just drain your bank account, but drains your faith in people. I had handed over my future plans, my financial cushion, the peace I'd been trying to build, and they spent it on cocktails and Instagram captions. But here's what made me smile, bitter, but real. They were drowning now, because the faucet had been turned off, and no one else was coming to save them. They had taken the help, burned the bridge, and then tried to act surprised when the house caught fire. I dried my hands and sat down again, this time opening a blank document. I titled it Truth. It wasn't a revenge piece. It wasn't for court. I just wanted to write the story as it happened, from the late-night calls to the final wire transfer, to the boat party that my sacrifice apparently paid for. I wrote until sunrise. Not out of anger. Out of release. The truth was in the transaction history. It always had been. They just didn't think I'd look. But I did. And now that I knew, I wasn't angry. I was done. They say people don't appreciate the water until the well runs dry. I say they don't notice the faucet at all until it stops working, and then they panic. That's exactly what happened. 1 week after I confirmed the money I sent never touched the mortgage, the messages started trickling in like a leaky pipe. First from Darlene, then Wesley, and finally Camilla. Corey, we really need to talk. I ignored the first few. Then came the voicemails. Long ones. Desperate ones. Frantic and full of revisionist history. You said you'd help us until we got back on our feet. We've always seen you as family. Camilla's not herself. She's been going through a lot. I played them in the background while making dinner, my kitchen small but functional, with a single gas burner that hissed if I turned the knob too fast. I stirred a pot of chili, listening to Wesley's voice crackle through my speaker as he tried to guilt-trip me back into servitude. We're not asking for handouts, Corey. Just support. The kind you always gave. The kind we came to count on. That part was the most honest thing any of them had ever said. They did count on me. They depended on my silence. My compliance. My deep-seated belief that doing the right thing meant sacrificing myself. They assumed I would always show up because I always had. And now that I didn't, their foundation was cracking. Camilla broke her silence last. A text, short and sharp. You left us to sink. You'll regret this. I stared at the screen for a long time. No punctuation. No softness. Just venom masquerading as blame. It was almost laughable. I could see her face as she typed it. Jaw clenched, probably pacing the marble-tiled kitchen I helped save. Still convinced that I owed her something. That love was a debt I had to keep repaying, no matter how she treated me. I didn't block her. I wanted her to feel the silence. To sit in it the way I had. To choke on the same stillness. She shoved me into the night. She packed my things and said, "You don't belong in this house." That sentence haunted me for weeks. Not because it hurt, but because it was the moment everything snapped into place. She wasn't angry because I left. She was angry because I stayed gone. Because I didn't crawl back with an apology and another transfer. You can't tell someone they're unnecessary, then beg for help when the roof caves in. And you certainly don't get to say you'll regret this when the only thing I regret is not leaving sooner. More voicemails followed. Camilla's voice grew more frantic with each one. You're being cruel, Corey. This isn't you. My parents are going to lose the house. I heard everything except I'm sorry. Not once did she say that. Not once did she acknowledge the truth. That she'd spent my money, lied to my face, and treated me like a disposable appliance. Not once did she take ownership. Just blame. Just pressure. I remembered a night early in our marriage. When the power went out because the bill hadn't been paid and Wesley was too proud to ask for help. Camilla cried. Not because of the dark, but because she didn't want her friends to know. Image was everything to her. Back then, I called the electric company and paid the bill in full. She kissed me like I was a hero. Said, I don't know what I'd do without you. Turns out, she'd spend my emergency savings on spa days and Jeep decals. I rinsed my bowl, set it in the drying rack, and wiped my hands on a towel. My phone buzzed again, another voicemail. I didn't even check who it was this time. The faucet was off. The account was closed. The reservoir was empty. They'd mistaken kindness for a contract. And now that the currency of my love had stopped flowing, they were scrambling to rewrite history. But I remembered it all. Every time they dismissed me at family dinners. Every time Camilla rolled her eyes when I mentioned needing to budget. Every sacrifice I made that was met with silence instead of gratitude. I thought about replying, just once. Maybe a final message to put a period at the end of the sentence. But I didn't. Not because I couldn't think of what to say. Because I didn't need to say anything at all. My silence was the reply. 1,000 words inside one quiet act of self-respect. I sat by the window that night, sipping tea while the city moved beneath me, cars humming, lights flickering in distant apartments, lives being lived. I used to think being alone was the worst fate, that solitude meant failure. But now, it felt like peace. No one was calling my name like an alarm. No one was tapping my shoulder with new demands. And no one was draining me in the name of love. They could keep their blame. They could keep their chaos. I had kept the most valuable thing, myself. It was Saturday morning, one of those rare, golden kinds where the sunlight filtered through my kitchen window just right, warming the floor tiles and softening the hard edges of everything. The air was quiet except for the steady hum of the fridge and the low rumble of the washing machine tumbling a load of laundry. I was folding shirts on the couch, letting the day pass without urgency. No one needed me. No crises to fix. Just peace and cotton and steam. And then my phone rang. I saw the name flash across the screen and paused, a clean white undershirt still clutched in my hands. Wesley. I let it ring once, twice. I should have declined it. Should have let it go to voicemail like all the others. But something about it felt final, like the last piece of a play that didn't know how to end. I answered and pressed the phone to my ear, saying nothing. His voice came in rough, gravelly, like he hadn't slept. Corey, he said. Listen. I know things have been messy. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. But we're in a bad spot. Really bad. I waited. He continued. We're about to lose the house. The final notice came yesterday. Camilla's been a wreck. Darlene is she's trying to keep it together. But we've exhausted every option. Still, I said nothing. Wesley sighed, his tone dipping into something I recognized, desperation wrapped in entitlement. I know things were rocky, he said. But we really need your help now. You always came through before. And there it was. The sentence that cemented everything I already knew. You always came through before. I stared at the sunlight spilling across the room. Listened to the spin cycle slowing. Smelled the faint scent of fabric softener in the air. I was still calm. Still grounded. Still done. I raised the phone back to my mouth and said, evenly, the day Camilla told me to leave was the day I left everything, including that mortgage. Silence. It stretched on so long I thought he might have hung up. But then he cleared his throat and asked, so that's it. And that's when I smiled. Not with joy. Not with pettiness. Just with the deep, quiet satisfaction of someone who no longer owed anyone anything. No, Wes, I said softly. That was it months ago. You just didn't realize the lights were off until the room went dark. He didn't know how to respond. I could hear it in the shallow breaths, the faint clink of something glass in the background. Probably pacing, probably trying to find a new angle, a new plea. But there wasn't one. You all had me, I continued. At my best. At my breaking point. At every version of tired a man can be. And you didn't just take advantage of that. You buried it. Pretended like my effort was owed, not offered. We never meant to it. You did. I cut in. And that's okay. Because now, I mean this. I'm not your solution. I'm not your backup plan. I'm not the guy you call when the bills come due and no one else picks up. I'm just not part of this story anymore. He let out a long breath. Camilla regrets what she said. She regrets losing access to me, I replied. Not losing me. Another silence. Then, almost reluctantly, she said you'd moved on. That you were seeing someone. I almost laughed. You mean because I haven't called in weeks and I stopped funding the family business? No, Wes. I'm not seeing anyone. I'm just, Seeing clearly, he tried once more. But the house will be lost, I said, not unkindly. Because you lost the man who was keeping it afloat. He hung up before I could. And for the first time in 6 years, I felt like the last word belonged to me. I put the phone down gently, not triumphant but steady. I finished folding my shirts, turned off the washer, and opened my window to let the breeze in. Outside, the world was still turning. Somewhere, someone else was being asked to give more than they should. Somewhere, another man was being measured only by what he could provide. But not here. Not anymore. I made coffee, sat on my small balcony, and let the warmth fill my chest. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel vindicated. I felt whole. Wesley would tell his version of the story. Darlene would spin hers. Camilla would probably post something cryptic and poetic about betrayal and loyalty. But I had no urge to correct them. The truth didn't need defending, it had already been spoken. Clear. Simple. Final. You can only carry people so far before you learn to carry yourself. And I was doing just fine. The calls slowed. The messages thinned out. One by one, they went silent, not because they understood, but because they finally realized I wasn't coming back. That the well had dried. That the man who used to rush in with solutions now sat in a place they couldn't reach, a place guarded not by distance, but by self-respect. It's funny. When I lived in that house with Camilla, silence was a threat. It meant something was coming, an argument, an accusation, a reminder that my best was never enough. But now, silence was peace. It was safety. I woke up to it every morning. I fell asleep wrapped in it at night. Freedom didn't come like a lightning bolt. It came in the form of small, consistent truths. My coffee brewed exactly how I liked it. The lights were never left on in empty rooms. My paycheck landed and stayed where I put it. My apartment, small, imperfect, and honest, felt more like home than any house I'd ever paid for. I still remember the first time I realized I wasn't holding my breath anymore. It was a Tuesday. I was walking home from work, bag slung over one shoulder, earbuds in, listening to an old playlist I hadn't touched in years. A song came on, something Camilla used to hate, and I didn't skip it. I let it play, and halfway through the chorus, I laughed. Out loud. No one was around, but even if they were, I wouldn't have cared. I laughed because I was free. Because I didn't have to tiptoe through someone else's mood swings. Because I wasn't walking into a home where love came with a price tag. I'd spent years drowning in debt that had nothing to do with money. The kind of emotional debt where you're always trying to earn your place. To justify your presence. To prove you're worth loving because you give and give and give. But I'm done giving to those who only take. I didn't need to make some grand announcement. I didn't need to post a manifesto or hold a grudge. I just needed to live. Quietly. Intentionally. Freely. Sometimes I still get a call. I don't answer. Sometimes I'll see a name pop up in my inbox. Camilla, Wesley, even Brandon once. I don't delete the messages. I let them sit there unopened. Not because I'm waiting, but because even my indifference now feels like power. They'll never know how good it feels to choose silence over chaos. To choose myself over obligation. And I won't explain it to them either. They had years to see me. Years to appreciate me. To hear the stress in my voice and the fatigue in my body. To see what it cost me to be the man they leaned on like a foundation. They didn't. And now? Now they don't get access to the man I'm becoming. I'm not rich. Not yet. But my life is mine. I wake up when I want. I eat when I'm hungry. I talk to people who ask how I'm doing without needing anything in return. I see friends. I read books. I walk for no reason other than I can. The roof over my head doesn't leak. No one texts me at midnight asking for $600. No one gives me silent treatment when I say no. And maybe most important of all, I no longer feel like a stranger in my own life. It's strange, looking back. Sometimes I ask myself if I was too harsh. If I should have tried harder. If I should have forgiven the betrayal, the disrespect, the indifference. But that question always ends the same. Love doesn't sound like, you're nothing without me. It sounds like, thank you. We'll figure this out together. I never got that. What I got were demands dressed as devotion. Gratitude that vanished the moment I said no. And a partner who saw me not as an equal, but as a tool. Something useful until it wasn't. So no, I wasn't harsh. I was human. And I gave myself the one thing they never offered me. Grace. Grace to walk away. Grace to heal. Grace to build again. Slower this time, smarter, sturdier. One brick at a time. One choice at a time. One morning at a time. A few weeks ago, I bought myself a small gift. Nothing extravagant. Just a leather journal, bound tight with a simple strap. I started writing in it. Thoughts, memories, things I don't want to forget. Not because I'm holding on to the past, but because I want to remember how far I've come. On the inside cover, I wrote just 6 words. Freedom is the quiet after the storm. It is. It really is. And I've never felt more alive.